Secrets from a Coach. Thrive and maximise your potential in the evolving workplace. Your weekly podcast with Debbie Green of Wishfish and Laura Thompson-Staveley of Phenomenal Training.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to the fourth in our series of what we're doing for the lovely month of May. And I'm delighted that we're joined by another guest, and we are going to talk about all things to do with the inner wellness from an NLP perspective. And I'm joined today by Mel. So I'll get Mel to do her intro about who she is and what she does. And then we're just going to explore, what does that mean when we're looking after our inner wellness as part of our focus on that wellness maintenance check that we're doing mid-May, which is what we're doing this year. So let's explore. Hi Mel, thank you for joining us. So tell us, who are you? Do your intro. What do you do and who are you?
Hello. Well, first of all, thank you for having me here. So I'm Mel Yea, and I'm a neuro-linguistic-programming master practitioner, a learning and wellbeing specialist. I live with my husband and my daughter and my dog and my guinea pigs, and I have one-to-one clients specializing in anxiety, helping people find their calm and move away from fear. And I do training and facilitation in companies.
Cool. So for those of our listeners that don't understand a little, I mean, this is a huge topic. I do know that, Mel, but for those of our listeners that don't really know, when we're talking about NLP and neuro-linguistic programming, what does it actually mean? If you could sort of try and sum it up, how would you sum it up for people that may not be aware of it?
Yes, it is a really big topic. So to give an overview so we can begin to understand neuro-linguistic programming. We are always neuro-linguistically programming ourselves because we process the world through different senses that we have. We know the senses. And unconsciously, most of the time, we process the world and come up with beliefs and values that then we use to navigate. And sometimes they're good and useful, and other times they're less useful, and that's when we can find ourselves scared or feeling things that we'd rather not feel, having outcomes that we'd rather not have. So in a nutshell, although neuro-linguistic programming is long and sounds scary, doesn't it? It's really just about how we're programming ourselves, because we are all the time. And when you have an understanding of NLP, suddenly you've got more power over how you're programming yourself, and more consciousness, more awareness.
Yeah, which is good. Yeah. And I suppose, like you were saying earlier, just a minute ago, doing the work with people that may have anxious thoughts or having to deal and overcome phobias or fear or everything else, that's where you can work with somebody to, I suppose, understand that and unpick some of that programming, in inverted commas, to have a different way of viewing the world, I suppose.
Exactly that, because if we don't know how we're doing something, then it's not easy to know how to change. So we have to be able to work out what the person's doing internally, so their internal strategies. And once you learn NLP, it's relatively easy, and change can be quite quick. And I think there's often the misconception that change is a hard thing and that it takes a long time, and we have to rebuild habits. And a lot of the time, actually, it can be really fast. It depends, how quickly the person wants to work. But in the space of an hour, I can do a lot, because I can see how they're doing it, which gives me, the ability to change and reprogram. But also, I share what I'm doing. It's not sort of some black magic, which means that the person then has the tools themselves. They're able to understand what it is that has happened, what I've done, and so next time if something similar happens, they have that tool for themselves.
And it's so powerful as well. So I know one of the things that we wanted to talk about was around looking at our own inner wellness and how this understanding of this, process, practice, whatever you want to call it, it's just a way of being sometimes, isn't it? What is the importance in your view of having that inner wellness?
Well, in my opinion, it's everything. I think it's the most important piece because, as I was saying, we're always programming ourselves. Most of the time, unconsciously, we don't realize how we've reached the conclusion or how we've done the behavior. And so if we're not aware of our inner wellness and how we're doing what we're doing, then really we have much less control over everything else, over our choices, our decisions, our behaviors, how we're showing up. So our emotional intelligence, which, as we know, has such a massive impact on our relationships, our success at work, our communication, everything really comes from, in my opinion, our inner wellness and our conscious awareness of ourselves and our feelings. So it's the beginning of everything, is in my opinion.
Yeah, no. And I always find it's quite interesting, isn't it, when you talk about things like this and people go, yeah, well, I've always done it this way. And whether it helps or hinders, there's a way of understanding it better. And I suppose sometimes there are other things that get in the way of us as people in the way we live our everyday lives. So in your time of practicing and doing what you do, what are some of the things that get in the way of us looking after our own inner wellness? And what do you see?
I think the first thing that gets in the way for people is knowledge. I think that at school and in life in general, we're not taught how our minds work. And I do hear, like you just said, I do hear a lot of people saying, oh, it's just how I do it. I've always done it like that. Those kind of throwaway comments, suggesting that they believe that therefore they couldn't change, that they don't have an alternative. And it's almost like people think that they just have to deal with the hand they're dealt, rather than going, oh, well, this isn't working well for me. How can I change that? The behavior that I want to get rid of, or the fear, the sadness, the shyness, the lack of confidence, whatever outcome it is. People think that that's who they are. And I hear people say, oh, my mum was the same, or, making out like it's just in them. And whilst I do understand that we have, personality attributes, we also have choices, and we can get better at certain things. And so, first of all, I think it's the knowledge that gets in the way. They don't know how, or they don't even know that there are ways, really simple ways to change the inner wellness. Because often we're told to go to the doctors and that perhaps there's something wrong with us, that we're ill. And whilst, of course, that is a possibility, there's a vast sort of spectrum of inner wellness, isn't there? And being able to talk about it and recognise the power that we do have in our own journey of inner wellness is really important. So knowing that they can change, I'd say, is the first thing that gets in the way, not having the tools. Because when we don't have the tools, we use the behaviors and the beliefs that we've unconsciously created to navigate the world. And of course, it's like a faulty compass that's inside us, because we keep doing the same thing and repeating the same habits and the same patterns. And that can really, get in the way of being able to have that, find your inner wellness.
And I suppose when you're talking about that, I quite like that you've got a bit of a faulty compass. My cat's come to listen in as well to what you have to say today, Mel, as well. But when we find ourselves with that faulty compass, I love that description. It sort of is a bit all over the shop, right? What sort of things can people do to help themselves?
So the first thing, I always say that awareness is 50% of the journey. So once you know roughly what's going on, then suddenly you've got power. But until you've got an understanding or an awareness, you're essentially powerless. You do need to know what's happening. And so it can be about pausing and becoming really present and noticing what's happening for you internally in your inner well-being. And a lot of the time, some people come and see me and I'm really amazed at their self-awareness. So it's very possible that people can stop and pause, which is why this mindfulness and, pausing and being present hearing your thoughts, what you're saying to yourself, questioning them, and doing that piece of work, that can really be the first big step in the right direction. And then, depending on what's happening for the person, once they've got the awareness, often it's about how they're speaking with themselves, that self-judgment, that inner critic that you talk about, Debs, the tone that we use. And when I say, whenever we talk to ourselves more than anyone else talks to us, and so people think that it's okay to be mean to yourself and to self-judge, and that it's normal, and unfortunately it is quite normal, of course, we all do it. What it isn't is resourceful. So if we're mean to ourselves and judge, we're going to feel bad, so our thoughts will impact our feelings, which will then turn into behaviours. And so if we're not going inward and looking at those thoughts and what it is that we're saying to ourselves, then we don't have very much control over the behaviours, because we're triggering those feelings of inadequacy or fear, etc. So my first piece of advice would be to get still, notice what you're saying to yourself, and then shift. So it might not be easy for someone to go from 0 to 100, sort of, to go from being really mean to just being super nice. It might be a journey, so they might just want to take a little step in the right direction and just be a bit nicer, a bit kinder, a bit more sort of self-compassionate, a bit more understanding, and notice how that feels for them, and if that does create a bit of a shift, giving themselves recognition. One of my delegates from a program I was doing recently said, this morning I really didn't want to come to work, but I did, Mel. And I thought about what you said about being, giving myself the credit for each small little thing. He said, and I stopped and I thought, well done me. And he said, you know what? I felt so good after I did that. Amazing.
That little acknowledgement.
And he tried it out on Versailles, and it really worked for him. So it's simple things like that, as you know, can really make the difference to how you're feeling. So cheering yourself on a hard day, and giving yourself a break, and I mean, it sounds being your own best friend so that you can feel good, would be my first piece of advice. But I've got lots.
I'm sure, because as I say, this is a huge topic. And I know sometimes, like when we're thinking about in the world of work and teams, and, if you're maybe a manager or a leader, or you just, a colleague, you can probably sometimes hear that negative self-talk in somebody, and you hear it all the time. And I know one of the things that we always get asked, and I'm going to ask you this actually, which is completely off script, but I'm going to ask you anyway, is when somebody notices that somebody else in their team is having that negative dialogue and is outwardly saying that I'm no good at that, oh my God, it always happens to me, I'm rubbish, I'm not good enough, all the usual thing. How can somebody who hears that and says, oh, that's not true, or that's not real, how can they lean into that conversation and I suppose maybe help in a way to get that person to move forward? What would you suggest to them that they could start that conversation with if they're hearing it in somebody else?
Well, first of all, if they haven't noticed that maybe the person hasn't realised, they don't have the self-awareness that they're doing it, because we can be so unconscious, can't we, with this stuff?
Yeah, we can.
So it might first of all be a piece of feedback, in rapport and in a resourceful way. So I've noticed that you say these things, and I think the impact is that you then feel bad because I see your shoulders kind of drop and your head go down, and I wonder if it might be more useful. So a piece of feedback. And then sometimes a really powerful way to get that self-reflection piece is to say to someone, if you had a friend that was talking to themselves like that, what would you say to them, and what would you ask them to say instead? Because sometimes when we're removed, it's easier, isn't it, to sort of see the wood for the trees rather than when you're in it.
Yeah, definitely.
So removing the person.
Yeah, removing but not being afraid not to have that conversation with somebody either, actually, isn't it? That's also important.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Like any any feedback opportunity, lean in, know that it is an opportunity. And actually, if that was the situation, then that piece of feedback is worth its weight in gold, because if the person doesn't know how they're self-sabotaging or that there is an alternative, then telling them in a way that means they can have that self-realization is huge. That could be a really big moment. So yeah, permission to sort of lean into that and do your best so that you can give that gift.
Yeah, it's so, and I think it's, as you said, it's so important, because you're not only helping the other person, but at the same time, you're sort of maybe learning about yourself, because sometimes we pick up the same messages, if you like, that other people are doing, and we go, oh, maybe I do that at times. So, how do we help ourselves in that? And I suppose gaining that knowledge and that awareness that enables us to change our thoughts and our impact that it has on our feelings and I suppose ultimately into our belief system as well, providing it's not so ingrained, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. Because when we say a belief, when we speak and we say something like, "Oh no, I could never do that. Yeah, I'm too this, or I'm rubbish at this," it's absolutely pointing to beliefs, and probably unconscious beliefs. And so, if that person's unconsciously being unhelpful in their own minds, being mean to themselves and self-judging, and you shine a light on it, which gives them that awareness, what that can then do, and that's also where I was saying about pausing and being still, so that you can get that reflection, is it can then mean you question the belief itself, because you go, well, actually, is that true? Is there a time I've been good at that, or could I, has there been a time where I thought I was bad and then was good, and challenge? So coach themselves to have more resourceful beliefs that have better outcomes. So I really like the word resourceful when we talk about this sort of stuff, because I think it sort of says what it does on the tin. What resource is it that you want, and what is it that you need to be able to have that? So what belief would be better? What value would be more resourceful?
I suppose what you're doing is you're reframing that, aren't you, in some way, to some extent, as to how people do talk to themselves, and if they can reframe that belief around, oh, is that really true? I've not always been like that, even just picking up on some of the language cues that we hear. So how does reframing how we talk to ourselves help us with our wellness and our well-being?
I think the reframing piece is key to all of it, because in order to reframe, we first have to be still. We first have to notice what it is that we're saying, and then when we do shine a light on it and realize that it's not helpful, and we don't want that anymore, whether it's a sentence that you've said to yourself or a belief or a value. When we think, well, what would be better? What would be more resourceful? We're empowering ourselves, aren't we? And you can have a bit of a play, excuse me, and see what fits. So, like I was saying about going from 0 to 100, you could go for gold and think, well, what if I thought that I could be amazing at that? And when I work with people one-to-one, sometimes when you go from 0 to 100 and you suggest that, you can see them go, oh, and they're uncomfortable at the mere suggestion. It's about being creative and just noticing what could work, what might be more believable, more easier for them to go with. And when we choose a new belief or a new thing to say to ourselves, we can notice how that then feels and what behavior we would then choose. And over time, we get better at it and start feeling better. And it really is ongoing, isn't it? It's not, you don't do this one day and then it's done. It's a bit like cleaning your teeth. You want to always daily have a moment, and be aware. And so obviously I've been doing this for around 14 years now, and I still have every day I catch myself and go, oh, I don't think that's a helpful one. And yet, and I think this is why the positive negative piece is interesting in terms of internal dialogue, because sometimes it's resourceful to say, do you know what, I don't feel good, I'm having a bad day, I feel down. And that could be called negative, but in that instance it's genuine, authentic, and so therefore perhaps resourceful to go, so actually I'm going to be really kind to myself and take the day, or whatever it is that you need, so this isn't about only thinking brilliant thoughts. It's not that toxic positivity piece. It's about knowing
Yes.
what's resourceful for you, not
Yeah.
pretending everything's okay.
Yeah.
Because that's when you can get in touch with your feelings, name them. That's all the data, so then once we know what it is that we're feeling, we can ask ourselves, so what actually would be resourceful for me right now, and make better decisions. And that's all about the inner world, isn't it? And
It is. Yeah.
of us.
And looking after ourselves well, I suppose. And I think, I know you started and you have running your Calm Club, don't you? Which you put together. I think it was through lockdown, wasn't it? You started that, and I know, when you look at that, and we'll give details of where you can find Mel and join her Calm Club. But it would be really cool just for people to understand, what was your thinking behind starting the Calm Club?
Yeah. Well, so when I first started NLP, around 14 years ago, I'd had really bad anxiety, really bad panic attacks for a number of years, and I had an NLP session and was amazed at how powerful it was, and so started my sort of calm journey, if you like, from then. And so I learnt neuro-linguistic-programming and coaching really for myself to start with. So I understand what it's like to not feel calm and not have resources. And like I said earlier, sort of cleaning your teeth, it's ongoing.
It is, yes.
And I definitely have many more tools now to feel good, and I'm lucky enough to feel calm a lot of the time. And through lockdown and the pandemic, of course, I think a lot of people lost their calm, or some of it. I also think that it forced a pause, and people who hadn't been super aware of their inner well-being and their internal dialogue, who hadn't named and labeled their feelings, and used them as data, suddenly were confronted with all of that stuff that they hadn't looked at, and that wasn't easy for everybody, understandably, as well as it just being a really challenging time. And I like that analogy, when they talk about if you've got a cup of coffee and someone bumps into you, and the coffee comes out of the cup, and it's the analogy of whatever's inside you in a moment where you're pushed, like a pandemic is a pretty big push. Whatever's in you is going to come out. So if you had been working really hard and not looking inward, and you did have unresourceful internal dialogue and unhelpful beliefs and values, and you weren't feeling too good, then that's what came out in that moment, throughout. And it was more than a moment, wasn't it? So
it was,
it was a big push. So the Calm Club, I asked myself, what could I do now to be useful to people? And so I thought, well, I'll pop something on Facebook and share sort of calmness, and see if I can sort of help with what's going on. And so that's what I did. And so it's been going for, I don't know, 3 years.
3 years now. I've lost track of the time, like Mel, but I just thought it was really cool because you share your tips and tricks and techniques, and I shouldn't call them tricks, they're not tricks, but I was like tips and tricks, but and techniques to help with some of the things that you're talking about, to create that sense of calmness within you, isn't it? Which is really, it's so valuable. And we'll make sure people, find you. But, if anybody's listening and they do want to, have a sneaky peek, then, Calm Club, isn't it, on Facebook for you. So thinking about you and your, if you, now knowing what you know, if you were to give your younger self, a piece of advice around creating that inner wellness and looking after you, what would you say to your younger self?
I had to think about this. I would say, first of all, be your own cheerleader, internally. So cheer yourself on. I'd also say, be more sort of internally validating. So in terms of inner wellness, don't always look for external validation. And I think that's a big piece for a lot of people. So wherever you can, give yourself a pat on the back and say, you know, you did that really well, because there's not always someone there to say that to you.
True.
And if someone doesn't say it, then sometimes you can think, well, maybe I'm not good at this, or maybe I'm not good enough, or, you know, that self-doubt can creep in. So I'd say internally validate at the end of each day, stop and go, what did I do well?
Yes.
And yeah, reward yourself in some
Yeah.
way. And that, I
Oh,
think,
yeah.
really helps resilience.
I think it does, and also, as you said, enables you to look after you too, right? As we always say, if you
Mm,
don't put your own oxygen mask on before others, you can't help
mm,
anyone else. But it's getting into that, as you said, the practice of it is as well, isn't it? And the more you give it a go, the better you'll be at it. But and we all know this as coaches, right? That we
mm,
might share some guidance and support and understanding to others, yet we've got to apply that to ourselves as well, isn't it? So even if you're a
absolutely.
team manager, supervisor, you've still got to look after you to be able to give
Yeah.
to others. So, which is
Yeah.
really important.
100%. And I think, if I can have another one,
Yes, of course.
another piece. Um, I had a client the other day who did an NLP diploma with me come and say that she'd shared a piece of wisdom with her son, and it had been really powerful. So I thought that's probably one of the most useful pieces,
Yeah.
and it's relevant to inner wellness, because if our if we're feeling a particular way, thinking certain things, and
Hmm.
it's impacting our state and we're not feeling good, one thing we can do, which is more of an external thing, is use our physicality. So what we're thinking will impact how we're feeling, which will come out in
Yeah.
our bodies.
Yeah.
So if for any reason you don't have you're just not able to shift what you're saying, then shift your body. So you can take yourself off somewhere private,
Yeah.
or you can just ever so slightly move your shoulders, release your jaw, release tension, stand maybe a bit more solid, because our mind impacts our body, but our body impacts our mind. So when we haven't got the control of our mind, we
Mm.
can probably loosen our shoulders, and even a power pose would be great to give us
Yes.
more of that feeling of grounded strength, and that can have a really powerful impact in the moment straight away. So
Yeah.
that's, yeah, I'd definitely let my younger self know about that.
Oh, I love that. I can just picture you in your power pose. I love that. I think we should all go around and do them as well.
I
But
agree.
I know this is such a huge topic, Mel, and it's one that people always ask us about, certainly. And I know we've worked together on various things around bringing this into the workplace. And I know initially when you first start talking about it, you can see people sort of going, "Oh, I don't know if that's what we want to do, or if that's too much or too deep." But when we translate it into how the impact it will have on not just them but their teams, you can
Mm,
see those light bulbs going off all of the time,
mm,
can't you? To go, oh yeah, why would we not put that into play? So
a
it's really
100%.
important to consider that, isn't it, for others as well?
Yeah, hugely, because when when we're teaching sort of or training communication, team building, leadership, it all starts with us internally and our inner
Yeah.
wellness. We can't do any of those external things effectively if we haven't become aware of
Mm.
how we are, because we'll be turning up in a way that we're not in control of. Um,
Yeah.
and what's fascinating, and I continue to be fascinated about it when I'm training NLP to companies and to individuals, how you can teach a piece of communication and it's relevant both when you're talking to a colleague and when you're talking to yourself. And so that's one lesson, but it's got double value, if you like,
Yeah. Yeah.
because it works both ways. Yeah, so the
Yeah.
awareness and the understanding of language and programming is
Mm.
relevant for yourself as much as it is for the people that you're talking to.
Yeah, I think you're right, Mel. And I know if people are interested in reaching out to you, and make sure they can find you on your usual channels, if you like, socials and things like that. But, this is, as I said at the beginning, this is such a massive topic, and there are so
Mm,
many benefits from
it's
understanding
huge.
the impact that it can have on your inner wellness. So I really appreciate you coming on today, Mel, and just sharing just a small little part of what you bring and what you understand and how you train and teach others to have the skills to help themselves as well. So I just want to say a massive thank you for your
Thank
time.
you.
And we look forward to finding out. I'm going to go and do my power pose now. And
Yes,
I know,
me
as
too.
Laura always says, clean the teeth you want to keep, right? So I'm going to make sure that we keep practicing on that as well. So thank you for your time, Mel.
My pleasure. Thanks so much.
Take care. See you later.
Cheers, Ed. Bye.
Bye.